What's up, it's ENDYMION, and Pride Month is almost upon us, friends, which means we're about to see some crazy pandering soon enough, but before that we have news on Star Wars The Acolyte. The new show from Harvey Weinstein's assistant that's coming out soon, and according to Leslie Headland, the creator of The Acolyte, if you don't like what she's selling, you're not a Star Wars fan. Uh-oh indeed. Beyond this, I also want to speak on the ever-changing culture war and how the critical drinker got pulled into the conversation and what the future of all of this looks like. But first, this all began with the New York Times, which published an article recently talking to Leslie Headland about The Acolyte, which is titled, "Leslie Headland hopes the Force is with The Acolyte. Her new Star Wars show is a dream come true, but she knows it carries enormous expectations. I would be lying if I said I wasn't scared," she said. This article is pretty much a goldmine when it comes to starting conversations. And it also paints Leslie in a more human light as well, conveying her sense of fear and responsibility, knowing that she's releasing something within a franchise that has been torn apart by apathy. In case you don't know, most of the Disney Star Wars shows have not performed very well. Even the ones that did do somewhat well, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, were blasted for moronic plotlines. Really stupid set pieces and featuring too much screen time on characters nobody cared about, like Reva instead of Obi-Wan since, it's named after him. According to Leslie, she's terrified of fan expectations when it comes to her new show. They even say in the article that Leslie is fully aware that this show could make or break her entire career overnight, and that the humiliation that could come from a failure of this size would be on a galactic scale. They actually say that, by the way, like it's right here in the article as you can see. Leslie conveys her fears of doing Star Wars where she says, "I essentially cold called Lucasfilm and after a lot of conversations found myself pitching a show. Utterly elated, my ultimate career goal, the culmination of my fandom. At the same time, I would be lying if I said I wasn't scared. There is so much pressure, it's extreme. I had never done anything this big before." In case you don't know, The Acolyte will also be 8 episodes long with a budget of $180 million. Each episode will be roughly 30 minutes long as well. And look, I don't want this show to be bad. I know that might sound weird to many, but it's true. The truth is that I want great Star Wars shows. I also want great Marvel shows too. We've been sifting through garbage for so long that it would be really nice to finally have a win here or there when it comes to these franchises. X-Men 97 was great. It was so nice to finally watch something Marvel related and go, wow, this is actually worth my time and energy to sit through. And I genuinely was looking forward to each new episode, and I want that for Star Wars. I don't want this franchise to die or anything like that. I would like to see good Star Wars shows and movies happen again, but the likelihood of this happening, however, doesn't seem to be the case, sadly. I mean, this part alone by the New York Times made my eyes roll. Like, listen to this. Star Wars The Acolyte features Amanda Stenberg stars as a dreadlocked warrior who has a complicated relationship with a Jedi Master played by Lee Jong-eej from Squid Game in his first English-speaking role. Jodie Turner-Smith plays the lesbian leader of a regal coven of witches, while the Filipino-Canadian-born Manny Jacinto appears as a shadowy traitor. In one of her most action-oriented roles since The Matrix, Carrie-Anne Moss plays a steely Jedi named Master Indara. From this description alone, it's eye-roll worthy because the New York Times goes out of their way to tell you the sexualities and ethnicities of the actors that are involved with the project. They could have just said that Jodie Turner-Smith plays a leader of a coven of witches, but no, that isn't enough. You need to also know that she's lesbian. And Manny Jacinto could just be described as a shadowy traitor, but instead you have to know that he's Filipino and Canadian. As if that somehow makes his role better because of his ethnicity. You see what I mean? The show isn't even out yet, and we're already resorting to identity politics to shill this product onto others. If Star Wars came out today, the New York Times would describe Billy D. Williams as a black scoundrel man who has a history with Han Solo. Like, we don't care what color he is, what's important is what his role is in the movie or the show, and that's it. But to these people, identity is everything, and Leslie sadly isn't giving her show any favors. The New York Times also tries to gaslight the reader into believing the Star Wars fandom is sexist, where they pick an anonymous comment on the Star Wars Acolyte trailer YouTube video that reads, "Why are there so many women, girls, and minority characters increasingly dominating the ranks of Jedi?" reads a comment on the Acolyte trailer with others expressing a similar worldview. And while the New York Times probably thinks it's a good thing there's so many women and such in the Jedi these days, the simple truth is that it's by design, of course. The Force is female is a term for a reason, because Disney has been womifying the crap out of the franchise for well over a decade now. And that fan apathy I spoke of has never been more solidified like it is now. These days, most people don't seem to care at all about Star Wars. Outside of the more recent games, the actual movies and shows have been pretty bad, all things considered. Do I think the Acolyte will save Star Wars? No. Even if it's great, it won't be enough to heal the wounded fandom's heart that easily. Disney would need to land multiple hits in a row that resonate with fans before we can officially state if Star Wars is back or not. Even with Marvel and the X-Men '97 show, sure it was great, but it still wasn't enough for fans to say Marvel is back. Maybe if Deadpool and Wolverine is good, and so are the next few films, then we can talk about it, but for now these franchises, they are struggling for good reason. The New York Times also tries to paint a picture that fans have been sexist towards more recent Star Wars movies too, but the reality is that women have been in Star Wars always. It's just that these days we can tell that they're deliberately pushing it on purpose, so it doesn't feel genuine anymore. This also brings up an interview George Lucas had back in 1988 when he was asked about by a reporter if he was going to bring more women into Star Wars as a franchise way back then, to which George said, and I quote, "Well, what of Princess Leia? When you're making a war film, how are you going to put women in it? Think of other war films. Think of The Longest Day, those films. Well, it's your galaxy, I have to go with the rest of the world. And still make it believable. I'm not how many women will be in the rest of the films. That's the kind of thing that plots dictate. What would Star Wars have been like if Han Solo had been a woman?" End quote. I really like that piece from George because he's right. He knew that ultimately, even though Star Wars is science fiction, its origins and inspirations are intrinsically tied to real-world concepts. And whether we want to admit it or not, the truth is that 99% of wars are fought by men almost exclusively. Sure, women can serve in the military, but more often than not, women are usually relegated to support-like jobs. You can call that sexist, but the fact of the matter is if your fellow Marine is wounded and he's a 200-pound guy with all of his gear on, the likelihood of a female Marine carrying him to safety is next to impossible. If we're being real here, implementing female soldiers into a real-world combat scenario where life and death are actual things you need to worry about, having female soldiers is pretty much a surefire way to ensure that you're screwed. And George instead understands that the two genders have vast differences between them as well as strengths. That's why for all 6 of his films, to the best of my memory, of course you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but for the majority of it, it's just men fighting mostly. Yes, there are some women like Leia and so on, but it's like 99% men fighting basically in it. And then Disney got a hold of it, and suddenly women are apparently the majority of the fighters, leaders, captains, and whatnot. It's just not realistic, even for Star Wars. You can call me sexist all you want, but war is war, and men are the ones predominantly laying their lives on the line. And George understood that, which is why his movies are as successful as they are, because they adhere to the core audience, which is predominantly male. And according to Kathleen Kennedy, who's been ruining Star Wars for years now, the problem isn't her and other women, but the male audience out there who is unwilling to change. She was also interviewed for this New York Times article, and she also had some things to say. I'll be combining what she said in that article, as well as what she said during Fortune magazine's Most Powerful Women Summit too. Anyway, she said, and I quote, "My belief is that storytelling does need to be representative of all people. That's an easy decision for me. Operating within these giant franchises now with social media and the level of expectation, it's terrifying. I think Leslie has struggled a little bit with it. I think a lot of the women who step into Star Wars struggle with it a bit more. Because of the fan base being so male-dominated, they sometimes get attacked in ways that can be quite personal. I think the interesting path we've had is the conversation that took place around consumer products. Because there were a lot of companies that were in place who frankly didn't initially feel that Star Wars was for girls. And when you have a company situation where between Lucasfilm and Disney, we were all looking at the situation and saying, no, with Star Wars, we have to change this. We have to make sure that we create products that are in a sense appealing to both boys and girls. What's wrong with that? The fact that the company was bought by the Walt Disney Company has been amazing because they very much support the fact that we are trying to grow in the workforce a number of women in executive positions and in all positions inside the company. And with the movies that we are making and with the protagonists that we are putting in the story, so I get a huge amount of support with that, but we have 50% of our executive team are women. And 6 out of 8 of the people in my story group are women, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that would be surprised that we're making Star Wars movies and the majority of the people involved in the development of these stories are women. And I think it's making a huge difference in the stories that we're trying to tell." End quote. Yeah, Kathleen, we can tell there's predominantly women in the story-making process because everything you make stars women, is directed by women, and it's made for women, and none of these things that you made is appealing to the Star Wars fan base either. And you're losing money, credibility, and you're growing fan apathy with every decision that you make. When was the last time you had a male protagonist that wasn't also a legacy character? Besides Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Disney Plus show, what new male protagonists have you created that were the leading character? The answer is 0, by the way. You reduced Finn to yelling Rey autistically as much as possible, and between your bad trilogy, Rogue One, and basically every TV show, you only starred women. Sure, you had Boba Fett in the Boba Fett show, but let's be honest guys, that show was complete ass. I guess the only one technically would be Andor, but one out of all of those? Come on now. Also again, Boba and Obi are legacy characters. Where are all the other new leading male role model characters? The only one technically since Disney bought Star Wars that has really worked well for everyone is Cal Kestis in the Jedi games made by Respawn. And arguably those games have some of the only successful stories and products that have been made within the Star Wars mythos since the acquisition. Is it because it stars a man? Yes, I'll be honest, it is. Because again, your audience is predominantly male, so Respawn's 2 games prove that when you make a game starring a man and you don't make him a bitch boy who plays second fiddle to everyone else, but is actually the main character, you're showered with praise and money. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order sold over 10 million copies since March 2020. As of now, we don't know, but it sold an insane amount. And then its sequel, Jedi Survivor, beat the original's opening sales by 30%, but we don't know the exact number, but it's likely also in the millions too. Would I love a Cal Kestis TV show? Absolutely, but only if the people at Respawn are the ones that are writing the show. But I don't want any of Kathleen Kennedy's peons to touch it, but I personally don't think Kennedy would allow a Cal Kestis TV show to ever happen. Mostly because it would immediately become the most watched and best reviewed Star Wars TV show on Disney+. And that would anger Kennedy greatly because Cal is very obviously not a woman and that goes against her agenda. Circling back to Leslie in the New York Times article, she even admits in the interview that what she has also been frustrated by is the storytelling of Star Wars in the past. Although she doesn't directly state whether she means George Lucas Star Wars or Disney, probably because Kennedy is breathing down her neck the entire time. However, this next part might cost Leslie millions of viewers and goodwill because this is the kind of statement that will likely haunt her if her show fails, which is where she says this. "I stand by my empathy for Star Wars fans, but I want to be clear. Anyone who engages in bigotry, racism, or hate speech, I don't consider a fan." That simple statement here is what we like to call in the biz fellas a nuclear level statement. This is the equivalent of when the Dungeons & Dragons movies writers said that they like to humiliate and emasculate their male characters, and then people read that and then the movie ended up bombing. Leslie could have kept the water still, but she had to go there because of course she did. While I understand there is a portion of the fan base that is likely bigoted in all of that, the reality is that the majority of fans are just sick of the girl boss agenda. And that's women too, by the way. Just go ask that Star Wars girl. She'll tell you exactly what I mean. Just because people are not receptive to your onslaught of female characters that are leading Star Wars properties does not mean they're sexist or bigoted in any way. Especially when every single Disney-made show or movie pretty much stars only women, you can't be saying things like this. Your fan base is already divided, the people don't trust you, and they've wanted Kennedy, for example, gone for years at this point. The last thing you need is to attack the paying customer when your stock is down and all of your franchises are underperforming. These people, they never listen, dude. It's a sort of headline that'll haunt Leslie for years if this fails. The kind of thing where she will be in the shower and randomly think of what she said and just start screaming, knowing that it was all her fault. Like, look, even that Park Place had an article recently, and look at the title, man. This is not what you want for your show. This is how you send your show out to die, but what do you want me to say? They keep shooting themselves in the foot like this over and over again, all on their own. And it looks like the Disney woke stranglehold is here to stay, cause I guess breaking news, but Nelson Peltz has officially sold all of his shares in Disney effective immediately. What does this mean, you may be asking? Well, Nelson is a billionaire that was working with Ike Perlmutter, who's another billionaire, that sold Marvel to Disney back in the early 2010s. They wanted to combine forces so that they could basically force Disney back to its pre-2020 self where they made hits and weren't bogged down by identity politics. It was a whole thing. Valiant Renegade and WDW Pro covered this extensively on their channels, but the point here is that Nelson and Ike wanted to return Disney to its former glory. But the push didn't work, and the board of directors who were cemented in wokeness rejected it, and now Nelson Peltz has basically said screw it. So he sold his shares at $120 a piece, which means he made about $1 billion, which is insane, but there you go. So he's washed his hands and said, screw it, I'm not wasting any more time or money on this, and just let him burn it to the ground. So now wokeness is officially here to stay with Disney. There's no removing it or buying them out from the inside or anything like that. I know it's kind of doom and gloom, but it's official now. There's no changing Disney, Marvel, or Star Wars. They will ride this ship into oblivion at this point, and the only conclusion to this woke saga is that Apple buys Disney when they hit rock bottom, and then maybe, that's very slim, that Disney becomes their former selves again. Assuming, of course, Apple doesn't just rehire or keep the same board of directors on anyways. But it's official, fellas. Disney is forever woke now, and Star Wars The Acolyte is going to be a diversity, equity, and inclusion supercharged series. And if you don't like that, you're a bigot apparently. Also, if you don't plan on watching it, don't worry. I'll be watching it myself, just like I did with Echo and Madam Web for you guys. I'll sit through this so you don't have to. And then I'll tell you what happens and everything, so of course, stay tuned for that. Although one part of the Acolyte interview I found interesting was how Leslie Headland said the show was influenced by her relationship with her younger sister, and how they both felt like the other was wrong over whatever personal disagreement they had in the past. And that tension between siblings is a big plot point for the show, which for me personally is actually interesting, I have to say. As for my actual real life, my sister and I don't have the best relationship either, although for us it might be more influenced by the fact of my father passing away and all of that. But the point here is that that might be the one part of Acolyte I actually kind of want to see. That sibling disagreement that takes root and distances people. Now, will it be great or anything? Who knows, but at the very least, that's an interesting angle. It's basically taking the Luke and Leia concept and instead turning them against each other rather than reuniting them. And like George always said, Star Wars was a family drama at its core. It's just a shame what could be great is being bogged down by everything these people say around it. You're not going to win anyone to your side by saying these things or distancing yourself or attacking each other. The last thing Star Wars needs is more division, yet it seems like with every show they release, the chasm between the fans and the people who run the show keeps widening. Look, I get it, making stuff is hard. That never fails to dawn upon me, I understand that. I get having your failures for all to see as a YouTuber. Honestly, I understand this greatly, really. But I don't think the right path to go is to look at how everyone has done it before you and go, yeah, I'll just do that again. Especially when you know what they've done hasn't worked, but I suppose only time will tell, and the culture war is nowhere near ending either. Every day something new happens, and it's like two siblings who love each other but are refusing to lay down their arms to just talk. Each side wants to be right, and ultimately it's spiraling into a never-ending war. It has to end eventually, it can't go on forever. But the longer they keep doing this, the worse it's going to become. We need to heal these wounds, but the people in charge, they don't seem interested in bridging those gaps. And that's the saddest part of all of this, really. Finally, let's end with this critical Drinker situation, which was more funny than anything else. So Drinker, who's a friend of the channel, I was also recently on his stream over on his gaming channel, The Critical Gamer, where he reviews and critiques games. We talked about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, so if you want to go check that, please do so. But anyways, Drinker obviously primarily reviews movies, and he did that also for Furiosa. Then one user, who has now since protected their account basically, found his video on YouTube and tried to paint the narrative that Drinker was to blame for Furiosa's failure. The people who came to this person's rescue are your usual woke freaks, but many also came out in defense of Drinker and said he didn't even give the movie a bad review. In fact, he actually enjoyed the movie, which confirms that this person who tried to blast Drinker clearly didn't even watch the video. Drinker responded to the now private page with, "Me gives the movie a positive review and speculates that maybe people weren't so enthusiastic for a Mad Max film without Max. This brainlet, oh my god, stay away from her, you monster. What I like about this whole scenario is that it proves that we're gaining ground, guys. All of us, and I mean as a community, we're becoming in a sense, if you will, more mainstream and well known, and that's actually a good thing. It means that Hollywood, gaming, and so on, they can't really ignore us anymore. I mean, Drinker and Nerdrotic were on Piers Morgan like a month ago or something. Isn't that wild? YouTubers on Piers Morgan of all places, but that's what's happening. The influence of YouTubers is becoming too strong and prevalent for these groups to ignore anymore. We're slowly but surely becoming the mainstream, and they hate that, and I personally think it's hilarious and awesome. The fact I talk to game devs on the down low about their studios and the politics within them, it's wild that people who work in games, for me anyway, watch what I do, and they agree. The whole point of this segment isn't to dogpile or attack the Twitter user who came for Drinker. They're just another typical girl boss agenda enjoyer. It's fine, who cares? The real point that I really want to drive home is that, dear viewer, you are winning. It may not seem like it at times, but you are. Disney may be holding onto their identity politics like a woman clutching pearls, but the truth is that they can't do this forever. Doesn't matter how sturdy or high you think your tower is, you can always fall down. And the more you ignore the paying customer, the worse it's going to get for you. So, will the Acolyte be terrible? Maybe. I don't know yet, obviously, it's not out yet as of the making of this video, but I guess we'll see, won't we? And now that Peltz and Perlmutter have said sayonara to Disney, how much more woke can they get? I guess time will tell, won't it? As for Drinker, he does good work, go support him if you aren't already. And yeah, I think that's enough for this video. Alright, well, thank you for watching, have a wonderful day, and remember guys that you're winning, so that's neat. Subscribe, share, and like the video to help the channel out, thank you to my patrons, and just thank you for everything. And I'll see you in the next one.